If there's one thing that filmmakers love more than anything else, it's to make things as difficult as humanly possible. So it's no surprise that for decades, directors have been obsessed with one-upping each other with the most difficult underwater sequences ever put to film. Chances are, you have no idea just how much these actors went through for only a few minutes of underwater action. There was a huge difference between the filming of the original Suicide Squad by David Ayer and the film we actually got. Ayer's original cut was apparently a very emotional experience for all of the actors involved, and it created a real bond between them. Like the Lord of the Rings cast or the Avengers cast, many of them got matching tattoos commemorating the experience. So it should come as no surprise to learn that Margot Robbie went above and beyond with her training for the brief underwater sequence she filmed while Batman saved her from Joker's crashed car. Despite the fact that Robbie's underwater scene was only a few brief moments long, she apparently trained so hard that she was able to hold her breath for 5 minutes. For that kind of commitment, I kind of hope the next Suicide Squad film has at least one sequence set in Atlantis, so she can show off. If you ever feel bad about being late on an assignment, just remember that the sequel to James Cameron's Avatar was supposed to come out in 2018. It's currently scheduled for 2022, but I'll believe it when I see it. The film will be taking us to a new corner of Pandora this time around. We will be learning about the tribes of Na'vi that live in the water. The filming has been partially so difficult because Cameron decided to film the underwater sequences actually underwater instead of using CGI. New cameras, tanks, and motion capture technology all had to be invented to support Cameron's ambitious vision for the sequences. The actors all had to train extensively for the film, with Kate Winslet apparently breaking the record Tom Cruise set for the longest underwater scene ever filmed. It's really hard to outstunt Tom Cruise, but she managed to pull it off. Perhaps the only thing more terrifying than participating in the Tri-Wizard Tournament's underwater challenge for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was filming the Tri-Wizard Tournament's underwater challenge for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Daniel Radcliffe apparently had to train for 6 months to get ready for filming in the giant tank of water that was created for the shoot. It held apparently 500,000 gallons of water with a blue screen behind them for CGI. The safety team for Radcliffe and the other actors were extensive. Every few minutes someone would come along and give Radcliffe oxygen to breathe before his next take. The thing that proved to be tricky wasn't so much the choreography as it was the acting. Not only did he have to remember all the swimming moves while holding his breath, but he also had to make sure his performance was as good as it would be in the normal scene. Of all the modern movies to feature extensive scenes underwater, probably none has as many as Aquaman. After Arthur decides to journey to his mother's homeland Atlantis, a great deal of the film is set in the beautiful underwater city. So how did they film so many scenes underwater with actors talking to one another while seemingly breathing the whole time? Well, the simple answer is they didn't. Many of these films went above and beyond to make sure the film was actually shot underwater, but Aquaman got around this by filming all the actors on wires, making them look like they were underwater. While this made everything a lot easier, it created a new challenge: their hair. Apparently the CGI hair was one of the hardest things the film had to do. I mean, would it really have been so hard for Jason Momoa to grow gills for that part? I guess actors just don't like to commit anymore. The Meg is basically like Jaws times 1,000 with an enormous shark fighting against Jason Statham. That shark never stood a chance. The underwater sequences where characters were attacked by the creature were filmed in a giant tank with a special circular lighting rig created to capture the performance. Well, apparently shooting the film was scarier than being chased by a giant shark. Ruby Rose confessed that her clothing was inappropriate for the underwater shoot. Everyone was impressed by her panicked performance without realizing that her shoes were filling up with water and sinking her to the bottom of the tank. She had to be rescued by the safety crew who jumped in before Rose was in serious danger. At least they thought her performance was accurately anxious. If the last few Mission Impossible movies are famous for anything, it's the impressive stunts that Tom Cruise really performs against all odds, and the unimpressive editing that makes it look fake. The worst example of this was in the most recent movie Fallout, where Cruise does a sequence while skydiving only for CGI clouds to make it look like he's on a green screen. Well, that exact same thing is true for the underwater sequence in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. That sequence shows Ethan Hunt struggling to hold his breath while completing a mission underwater. Even though they easily could have taken Cruise out of the water safely, he apparently insisted on doing the whole sequence in one take. This would have been really impressive if the editor hadn't used so many quick cuts to make the stunt look fake. I know that Cruise had to become a producer on the films to get to do his own stunts, but I'm pretty sure he's gonna have to direct and edit them as as well if he wants them to look good. Okay, so most Bond movies hold the old Sean Connery films as classics. When you ask fans what their favorite of his films are, they will almost always cite Goldfinger or From Russia with Love. While both of those films are great, my favorite is definitely Thunderball. As a kid, I loved the underwater battle sequence that is still one of the most ambitious scenes ever filmed in the series. The man behind the sequence, Riku Browning, was given a ton of freedom by director Terrence Young. Apparently, he devised 18 sequences that contained 83 separate scenes. It was extremely difficult, not only because there were so many divers, but also because they had dangerous weapons in play and were forced to communicate with hand signals. They just don't make movies like this anymore, and that's probably smart because it sounds like a pain. The shooting for Titanic was legendarily difficult. I mean, it was a James Cameron film, so I think that was a given. He pretty much built his own little Titanic island for the shoot and went massively over budget. He was just lucky the film was one of the highest grossing films of all time, which probably allowed for him to give out the biggest "I told you so" in cinema history when George Lucas made Star Wars. One of Cameron's most self-indulgent moments was when he chose to sink down the actual Titanic in order to get a proper feel for what it was like. The water sequences were so cold and difficult throughout filming that many people got colds or the flu. Kate Winslet vowed to never work with him again because of how difficult it was. I mean, she is gonna work on Avatar 2, so I guess she got over it. I don't think it's controversial to say that the fourth Alien movie, Alien Resurrection, was utterly terrible. In fact, looking back on it, I think the underwater sequence is the only part of the movie worth remembering. I mean, look at how metal Ron Perlman looks shooting a giant gun underwater. Well, apparently the sequence was more dangerous than diving into a pool of xenomorphs. Winona Ryder nearly drowned as a kid, so the entire sequence was a horrifying experience for her that you can definitely see in her performance. She was able to push through, but it was likely one of the most harrowing shoots she's ever had to go through. Worse than that, we nearly lost Hellboy himself. Perlman apparently nearly drowned while shooting the scene, but he was luckily saved by a crew member. Of all the films to sacrifice yourself for, Alien Resurrection would be one of the worst. One of the most famous underwater scenes ever filmed came from a movie you may or may not be familiar with. The 1984 film Top Secret parodied spy films in a similar way to how Airplane parodied, well, pretty much everything. The best part of the film by far is the silly fight scene that was filmed entirely underwater. The intricately planned scene was so difficult that it had to be filmed in increments of 10 to 15 seconds. That's a commitment to comedy you just don't see anymore. Apparently the greatest challenge for Val Kilmer had nothing to do with holding his breath while swimming, but keeping himself from laughing and blowing the scene. After watching all these people brutally film these underwater sequences, it really makes me appreciate how much I've been taking all this oxygen for granted. That's good stuff.